Good evening, Teshia.
Well, a rounded panel ready for this discussion. Of course, you are also encouraged to be a part of this evening's presentation. Later on in the program, you'll be able to call us on 228-5562 or 228-5563. So get close to your phones and keep the number handy, because after this break, we start this evening's discussion. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the People's Business. There's a lot that we have to get to in talking about the Barbados National Building Code. So let's jump right into this evening's discussion. And we're going to start with you, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Browne, as President of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. Lay out for us, what is the Barbados Building Code and why is it important?
Well, good night to you and to everyone. Well, in reality, the thing about codes and standards generally is that they are so common in modern society that we actually take these things for granted. Modern society is just too complex to be able to operate successfully in the chaos without some kind of codes. Almost every area, therefore, of modern society tends to be guided by codes and standards. No one would consider, for example, a situation where road traffic rules were left to the good judgment of road users to decide on such matters as speed limits, which side of the road to drive on, and when to stop at intersections. These are all guided by codes, and we take these for granted. No one would expect us not to have these codes. This happens in many other areas of our society. So building codes is a set of rules that actually specify minimum standards for constructed infrastructure in a society. These rules tend to be fairly specific to this society. They tend to be fairly complex because we live in a complex society, but there are people who are trained to understand these rules and to apply them. And this set of rules is what we refer to as our building code.
All right. Now, how often does it get updated? And what's the process for updating it?
That's a very good question because I think many people are confused with the way this works. Now, our building code is actually under the jurisdiction of the Barbados National Standards Institute. It's actually BNS, SP, and there are 18 significant parts of the code. It's a fairly comprehensive document. It is updated on an ongoing basis. In fact, there are a number of standing committees whose role it is to continuously monitor the code, to determine the applicability of the code. We live in a society that is changing continuously. Threats are changing, the infrastructure is changing, the materials are changing, and even the people are changing. So therefore, the code is a living document that is under continuous review by a series of experts. And these include engineers, builders, customers, equipment suppliers. So it is a voluntary code. BNSI, the National Standards Institute, therefore put together a comprehensive team of experts who, on an ongoing basis, review different aspects of the code to make sure that it is always relevant and up to date.
All right. So with this code, notably being of such importance, why then is it kind of left to chance for people to adhere to the standards that are outlined in this particular code?
You just perfectly articulated the question that we have been asking at the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers for the last 30 years. And the interesting thing is that Barbados is actually, of the 17 Commonwealth Caribbean countries, the only country that do not have a legal requirement that these codes be implemented is Barbados. the OECS, they actually have a collective code that is part of their law. Now, not everyone obviously apply these laws the way that we would like, but at least the other countries have it in their law mandating that. So that question is one that we would really love to get answered. Initially, our question used to be, why is there not a law? We had an old tongue and country planning act, definitely outdated. But over the last couple of years, and it was actually passed in the upper and lower house in 2020 or 2021, that has been corrected. So we now have a modern, excellent piece of legislation. The only problem, of course, is that a critical part of that legislation has not been proclaimed, and therefore Barbados is in a situation where, although we have a code, a good code, and managed by BNSI, and although we have a law passed in the upper and lower house, we still have a situation where that law is not in place, and therefore it is left to persons to follow the code voluntarily.
All right, now that would take on a whole new life of its own. We'll delve into that a whole lot more as we move on in the discussion. But as we move to involve the other gentlemen in the discussion at this stage, now we know that emergency management is really critical to ensuring that buildings and structures are resilient in the face of natural disasters. So you work closely with, I would imagine, engineers and architects and different stakeholders to ensure that structures are designed with emergency preparedness in mind. So with all of that, I'm going to turn over now to you, Selwyn Brooks, to talk to us about how what the DEO is seeing once you get on the ground. Since we are not necessarily adhering to these codes, what are some of the areas that you are seeing? Where are some of the areas that you are seeing challenges when you head out after we have these tropical depressions or tropical storms or whatever incidents they are, where there may be incidents where people are not adhering to the code? So what would you as the district emergency organization like to see based on what you're experiencing?
Good night to everyone. The District Emergency Organization has the opportunity to conduct community profiles from time to time. These profiles would arm us with the information that we will gather, and since this evening we are speaking specifically about the building and housing, we will come across from time to time persons who obviously are not paying attention to the proper evaluation of their homes, retrofitting them with the appropriate straps. Even in some cases, the design of the home would add to the possible impact if we have high winds. And we will try from time to time to inform residents of what we have observed, and we will rely on the professional persons to give the appropriate information that is required. However, the level of complacency still remains, irrespective of the fact that from time to time, and particularly during the hurricane season, a lot of information is given. But because for whatever reason best known to themselves, they choose not to adhere to the regulations or choose not to adhere to what is required so as to protect the investment that they have made in their respective homes. We also encounter in our profiling those homes that may have close to trees that has the potential to fall on the home. We will also look in terms of persons who have built in low-lying areas and are quite oblivious to the fact that flooding can be imminent if we have an extended period of rainfall. And we also encounter persons who do not pay close attention to the maintenance and the retrofitting of their homes as required. So all the District Emergency Organization can do is to bring this information in whatever form, whether it be on flyers or whether it be on brochures, to the residents concerned. And as we try to advocate, disaster management has to be everyone's business, and every person has a meaningful part to play if we are going to build a level of community resilience, and if we are going to allow this country to surface after the impact of a system that can have the potential to disrupt the quality of life that we have come to enjoy over the years.
Now, we just moved into the hurricane season at the start of June. We're literally just days in. And we often hear a lot of talk and reinforcement about the various hurricane shelters all across the island. How do you determine, or who determines? I would imagine the DEO plays, the various DEOs play a role as well, but we will have the overarching body, which would be ultimately telling Barbadians where they should go, what the hurricane shelters are. My question is, are these hurricane shelters where we are directing people to go all to the specification laid out in this building code? Or are there other specifications that are used to determine whether hurricane shelters across Barbados are fit for purpose?
The Ministry of Education has the ultimate responsibility on a yearly basis, not only for the inspection and evaluation of those buildings that are used as shelters, whether they Category 1 or Category 2. And every year there is a published document that persons can obtain that will give those specific buildings, whether it be schools or whether it be in the private sector, those churches that are used for shelters from time to time. It is quite obvious that for the ministry to ascertain the level of, or the proposed level of safety for these shelters, by the advice of a number of persons, whether it be the engineers, the fire department, the persons from the disabled community, and also members of the district emergency organization, so that we can arm residents with this information should they need to use it. But we go a bit further and always advise residents, your shelter should really be your home. And that brings to the significant value of this discussion, because there is a level of discomfort that can be experienced going to a shelter. So therefore, if you can do the necessary fortification of your home, you may not need to go to the shelter. And if by chance you may not have, because there's several persons in today's world who may be living from paycheck to paycheck, if by chance you do not have the capacity to house your family in your shelter, in your home rather, we advise that you seek some level of arrangements with your friends and families whose property might be able to withstand the likely impact. But we must always remember, what are we planning for? Are we planning for a Category 1, a Category 2, and God forbid 3, 4, or 5? So I think this speaks to the fact that we have been able to enjoy a certain standard of living thus far. But just let us see what we can do. If you do not have the information, seek it from the professional persons that they can advise you as to what you need to do to retrofit your home and to make your home as safe as possible to at least a Category 2 status, because 3, 4, and 5 can be very unpredictable in the level of damage that can happen.
All right, Mr. Brooks, you said quite a bit. We're going to have to dissect it as we go through. And here's a question that I certainly will pose to you and the Lieutenant Colonel as we move on in the discussion. The question really is, are we realistic in thinking that in even the short term we can move to get the vast majority of Barbadians to retrofit their homes to it is to code, considering that a lot of Barbadians live in chattel homes, which in effect were built to be dismantled easily. So that's something that we need to think about, but I want to bring Mr. Brian Murray into the discussion. You talked about a number of organizations and stakeholders who are a part of the discussion in determining, for example, hurricane shelters and so on. But my question to you is, what role does the Barbados Meteorological Services play in helping maybe builders and engineers or feeding into the said code to help with design and the construction of buildings that are resilient to even climate change, even without just talking about strictly hurricanes, but in dealing with what we're looking at? I mean, right now in Barbados, we are dealing with El Nino. And these days, the houses are so hot. So have you been engaged at that level where the Met Services have been lending their voice, really, to preparing a building code, or are you used or consulted by architects and engineers when they're putting these major projects together, or even homes?
A blessed good night to you, Teshia, and the panel, and those online. Well, what I could say here is that we do get requests from time to time from engineers concerning rainfall and temperatures and all of that. The thing about it is that from experience, what I have realized is that most of the damages associated with tropical cyclones come from tropical storms. Apart from Jeanette and Elsa, most of the damages have come from tropical storms. And I think that is something that has to be seriously considered because it has been going on for a very long time. And the case in point is Tropical Storm Lily, which affected us on the 23rd of September 2002, where it was a minimal storm, with sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, with gusts up to 64 miles per hour. Based on data that I have calculated and I have archived, we had over 570 homes being damaged. Now that's something that needs to be taken into serious consideration. So from time to time, we do get requests from architects and builders, they want to know about the rainfall and all that. But at the same time, you have to remember that it is also up to the builder, depending on the type of roof he or she is going to put on top of the building. Because it is a well-known fact that steep roofs are more likely to withstand a tropical storm or hurricane than those that are built like flat roofs. And that has been seen from time to time again.
All right. Let me double back now to Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Browne and that question that I posed, really, or the comment I made about the built structure of Barbados generally. I really don't have any empirical data about the lay of the land, really, when it comes to chattel houses as compared to the number of wall structures that we have now, or houses that and buildings that might be code. But based on what we see, because we can definitely go on what we see in every neighborhood, we still have chattel homes. So would it be realistic for us to talk about instituting a code where people have to adhere to the code in the next few years? All right, I'll let you think about that even further as we go to break. And when we come back, we hear from the Lieutenant Colonel on that particular matter. Stay with us. Welcome back to the People's Business. This evening we're looking at the building code, building with resilience in mind. Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Browne, President of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. I posed a question and made a few statements before we went off to break about the lay of the land, really, with the houses in Barbados are constructed and how realistic it truly is for your organization and other related organizations and stakeholders to ask for a code to be instituted. We know that it is needed, but based on what we see, how realistic is it to ask for it to be instituted in the short to medium term?
That's a very excellent question. And in fact, what you're doing is touching on one of the excuses used for delays. But let me make it very, very clear that the code is not about chattel houses or wall houses. In fact, a chattel house could well be built exactly to code and be very resilient in a serious hurricane, in a category 3 or 4 hurricane. The reality is that engineers and architects and designers and builders have developed the technology where we can actually design almost any kind of structure to withstand the kind of hazards that we expect. And of course, it's not just wind. We talk about hurricanes. There are also earthquakes, there's flooding, there's storm surges. There are a variety of hazards that we need to mitigate against. And many of our experts have spent years putting information together. You asked, for example, about the Met Office. But the Met Office is extremely valuable in giving us a whole library of expected rainfalls given different systems. And what engineers and architects and designers is use this information to mitigate against expected storms and hurricanes. So let's not think of chattel houses and all that. Now, what we would like to see is the code put in place. What the code does is to establish a standard for what is reasonably safe, given the resources we have and given the threats that we face. Obviously, as you suggested, some of our infrastructure is going to be below standard. Let me give you a little bit of a hint. I think it was in 2013, there was a United Nations report, a global report they gave on vulnerability to hazards. And there's a particular report on Barbados. They estimated that over 80% of Barbados' infrastructure will be damaged by a moderate earthquake or hurricane, 80%. That puts us in the worst of all the categories that they have. And by comparison, for example, St. Lucia next door is between 10 and 20% exposure for a moderate earthquake or hurricane. Now, when you put this, what it does is establish a level. So if I know I'm below the code, I know I can start to work towards that, even in a chattel house. And sometimes in a wall house. So it's not that wall houses are okay and chattel houses aren't. Are the houses designed to match the kind of hazards that we face? And what it allows us to do is to move gradually to a situation where we feel safer and safer. And as Mr. Brooks said, we get to this stage, which, by the way, Dominica is now articulating to be their national objective, where each person's home is their hurricane shelter. We have the technology to do it. Everyone seems to think that this is going to be some exorbitantly expensive exercise, and it need not be. The longer we put it off, the more expensive it is going to be, and it's going to be particularly expensive if we only start to think about it after we experience a serious event. So, to summarize, it is not wall or chattel. It is designed to specifications or not. The specifications are there. People have worked for the last 30 years to put them in place. I mean, really brilliant people. And the objective was not to make it as expensive as possible. In fact, things like hurricane straps and all that came out of an objective to make this as affordable and even retrofittable as possible. But unless we establish that there is a line above which we need to aim, there's going to be a level of complacency that we have suffered from that will continue.
All right. I believe that we have a caller on the line. We'd encourage you at this time to get close to your telephone lines, 228-5562, 228-5563, as we'd like to hear from you as well. So good evening. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good evening, Teshia. It's always good
evening,
to see
sir.
you. Remind me to take my tea. And good night to the panel. My criticism tonight is on the minister. He came a day before the hurricane season to give advice on what you do with houses and whatever not. I think he's a month too late. Though his advice was good, I thought that he came a bit too late, just because a day before the hurricane season to advise us on what to do. That's criticism for tonight.
All right. Well, thank you so much. What I will say is, if we're waiting on ministers to tell us to get ready for the hurricane season, then we've already lost. Let me turn over to you, Mr. Murray, your thoughts?
Okay, my thoughts on that is this. You do not have to wait until June the 1st. We go through this every year. You know that the hurricane season is from June the 1st to November 30th. And my thing about it is that time should be taken during the off season to make the necessary preparations. And that is what the focus should be on. If a family or individual knows that their house is not up to standard, then it is their responsibility to make sure that that home is brought up to standard. If it needs hurricane straps, then you go and get hurricane straps. If you need to do something and gets flooded, then you do that also. It is up to the individual and the household to make their plans in place. And it does not have to be by June 1st. It can be done at any time of the year. It can be done on Christmas. It can be done on Easter. So there's no limit to where you can actually start to make the retrofitting and the preparations. Not at all.
All right.
Because if you do that, then you won't have to worry about the hurricane season at all. You'll be well prepared for whatever comes your way.
Mr. Brooks, with that said, it comes full circle to you with the question, even looking at what we're talking about tonight and building with resilience in mind, do you find that Barbadians are open enough or open-minded enough about a building code or building to code, or even getting their homes to a place where they consider that their homes are supposed to be their refuge in the event of any natural or other disaster?
I think for years the discussion on the building code has taken place. My personal view is that I don't think people are interested in it, because if they were, they would take more proactive steps to make sure. And costs may be a factor, but it should not stop you from making a start so you can retrofit your home over a period of time. And I find that persons rush just before the hurricane season to see what they can do, and that is not the best time to take your galvanize off or to do the retrofitting. So as Mr. Murray has indicated, we now have to create a culture where people see what they need to do on an all-year-round basis, and also to move away with all the emphasis on the hurricane. Because your house can be impacted by earthquake, it can be impacted by flooding, it can be impacted by storm surge, as my colleague Mr. Browne has indicated, and depending on where you live is how you should get the pertinent and professional advice as to what you need to do. We also see popping up from time to time the methods of construction and the materials that are used. That is an area that is contributing significantly to the level of damage as a result of even a tropical storm, where you have wind speeds of 40, 45 miles an hour. So I think that business now have to take heed, and let us look at what we can do on an all-year-round basis as we look to provide some level of comfort and security for our homes during the hurricane season, but do that out of the hurricane season, because you're going to have some challenges doing certain repairs during the rainy season or during the time that you're likely to have some level of impact, and your planning for that can be disrupted by any system that comes our way.
So what are some of these materials that you're talking about? You talked about retrofitting. I know a number of years ago, the government said they were offering incentives to Barbadians for retrofitting their homes with hurricane straps and stuff. Is that what you're referring to? Or are there other materials that you're talking about?
No, hurricane straps can offer some level of support. But if your house is already sealed, how are you going to get access to those rafters and joists which you seek to put the hurricane straps? There's the building method of using screws should be encouraged, because it's a known fact that you have built your home 10 years ago, and with the constant changes in temperature for the galvanized, the hot and cold with different reactions taking place. Sometimes the what we call the drive screws um, raise themselves. Screws offer a better alternative to secure and to prevent that type of movement. And therefore, the plywood that is commonly used for almost everything, people using plywood for siding, they're using it for roofing, they're using it for everything. It is not the type of material that can withstand the water damage or water impact that you're likely to see during the hurricane season. And the other point that has to be taken into serious consideration, where are you living? What are the risks that your location is greatly exposed to in terms of the wind damage or the wind damage that is likely to happen depending on where your property is located, and also the pitch of your roof and the eave of your roof. And these are the things that we ask in person to pay close attention to.
All right, I believe we have another caller on the line, so let's take in that call. Good evening, welcome. Go ahead and share your comment or question.
Yeah, good evening. Could
Good evening,
I speak
sir.
to the engineer, please?
Go right ahead, sir.
Right. I want to ask the engineer a question. Why? I asked Eddie Ryan the same question. Why are we getting a 1 and 3/4 wood and not 2 by 3? That is the first that the house is too weak. Okay? People do not put on rafters 16 inches. They put them on 2 feet and all over the place. And why, I want to ask him, why is that?
Well, there's
Okay,
very
that's a
simple
very
reason.
specific question. Go
Yeah,
right
Yeah,
ahead.
but there's a very simple answer to that.
The next question. How do we tie down a roof from bottom to top? That's another question. How he tie a roof down? There's a special way to tie down a roof. A lot of time people put on a ring beam, and the ring beam can blow off with the roof because they don't know what they're doing. They bore the rafters, run a steel through it, and sometimes it only go a half inch to the bottom. If you're going to bore a roof, you will have to bore the roof closer to the top. So it,
All right, thank you.
It have strength.
All right. Thank you so much for your 2 questions. All right, so Lieutenant Colonel Browne, very specific questions for you.
But if I can start with the previous caller, and I'll get on to this one. First of all, in fairness to the minister, there are a number of different aspects of preparation for hurricane. I mean, what we are talking about as engineers and at BAP, our focus has been on what we consider to be long-term institutional preparation. We know we live in a hurricane zone. We know that there's a chance that we can be hit. So that even from the conceptualization of your home, from the idea that you're going to live here, questions like, and as Mr. Brooks said just now, are you going to live on the beach? Because then you have to consider storm surges. Are you going to live on a hill? Are you going to live on the flat? So these are institutional questions, and this is what the code tends to deal with. But in addition to that, there's also obviously the heightened alertness that comes during the hurricane season itself. There's the early warning and knowing the warning signals and all that, and the information from the Met Office. There's what to do during the event. So it is quite in place for the minister to come at the beginning of the season with a message. So I don't think we need to give him a lot of licks for that. I want to disagree with some of the other panelists, though, with this suggestion that people should know the risks and that they should take appropriate steps. These are very complicated. And this goes to the question that this last caller is asking. Why do we allow those small size wooden beams to come in and be used for rafters? Because we have no mandatory standards that says otherwise. If there's a code and the code says the minimum size and the minimum spacing is this, then you will not be allowed to build a house unless you meet that minimum standard. We do not have a law, so therefore people can buy whatever they want. And obviously, there are a number of people who will opt to buy the cheapest options available. This is what we want to stop. I disagree comprehensively that this is some kind of voluntary situation. Nowhere else in the world is it voluntary. These minimum standards are made mandatory because decisions made in these designs impact the whole society. When your house falls apart, it becomes a burden for everybody else. Apart from the missiles that they become when they blow up, then there's the whole question of reinstating you after the hurricane and all that. And to the extent that with fairly, and I think I want to emphasize this, fairly minimal upfront investments, a lot of this can be avoided. We can get ourselves from the category of 80% damage from a moderate system to the St. Lucia type category of 10 to 20%. The cost, you're talking about a 60 to 80% improvement in performance, and the cost is less than 10%. In many cases, the cost is just good advice. It may not even cost more to do it the right way. But some of these things are too complex to expect the ordinary house builder or the ordinary citizen to understand. This is why we have engineers. This is why we have architects. This is why these people go to school for 8 years. And this is why they study and become qualified. The problem is, in the absence of a system that supports this kind of expertise, what happens is that nobody uses it. So the one or two people who then go to an architect may find that they go to an architect that is accustomed to working on multi-million-dollar projects. Once this code is in place, you will see that there will be a market for general practice professionals who can give this advice at very, very reasonable costs, highly experienced people, and make this information available to the general public in the same way that a general practitioner doctor is available at minimal costs to save you lots and lots and lots of trouble when you have medical issues.
All right.
The critical thing is to have that code in place.
All right, and having that code in place, making it mandatory will mean that there must be enforcement. So when we come back, I'd like to talk to you about your thoughts on what are the next logical steps if we, in fact, want to have this code instituted, and it's mandatory for Barbadians and builders and engineers and architects to adhere to what's in the code. How then do we move to a place of enforcement? That's all next. Stay with us. Building with resilience in mind is what's on the table this evening on the People's Business. So we have a number of panelists here with us. I understand we have a caller on the line, so let's take that call before we move on. Good evening, welcome to the program. Share your question or comment.
Hello, good evening. My problem is a little bit from the topic tonight. Your topic is code. I want to find out about trees hanging over a property, hanging over my house. The land is not mine. The owners are dead, both of them. I would like to know how I can get some help in getting this tree from partly over my roof.
All right, thank you. I believe Mr. Brian Murray Sorry, Mr. Brooks of the DEO, that might be a question you might be able to help us with.
Yes, this is an issue that we come across very frequently, and more often than not, some persons do not have the wherewithal or the skill to effectively offer the level of removal or trimming of the trees. This statement may provoke some discussion, but I think that the government and the Ministry of Public Works, they are better equipped with the type of machinery in terms of the hoist, that for those persons, after you have been able to carry out some level of means assessment, who cannot afford to have that tree cut, that maybe they can render a little bit more assistance than they do at the moment. I'm not saying they do not, but I'm saying the severity and the gravity of the situation calls for that type of intervention. Secondly, there is a program that is being conducted now by the Department of Emergency Management, in which members of the community are encouraged to avail themselves of the level of training that will help them to safely use a chainsaw. Of course, just cutting a tree, especially if it is over your home, it is not only the safe use of the chainsaw, there's certain skill sets and things that has to be taken into consideration. But it also speaks to us when we are building our homes, what type of vegetation are we planting within close proximity to our homes, because trees will not stay to the same size at which they were planted. So these are discussions that we have from time to time, that while the DEOs are in the community seeking to share this type of information with residents, we don't get the buy-in, and we don't get the level of interest shown until the hurricane season is upon us. But we could only, if that person does not have the ways and means, I think they should bring it to the attention of the department, and the department, by association with engagement of other agencies, may be in a position to offer some level of assistance.
Now, we know that there are a number of pressing climate-related risks facing Barbados as a small island developing state, and most certainly where we're located. And I would imagine that the building code works to kind of mitigate the damage that we could see with a number of these climate-related risks. There are other risks as well. So I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Morias, Acting Director of the Barbados Met Services. What are your thoughts on mandatory implementation of the building code based on these risks that we know exist?
That the building code should be enforced. But I want to add here that it also depends on where you're located. For instance, if you're living on the coastal regions, you could expect that the risk of being affected by a tropical storm in terms of the winds and a storm surge is going to be much greater than if you are living further inland and in a sheltered area. So that is something that you have to be taken in consideration. Yes, the code should be there for all one and sundry, so that it can build a more resistant, a more resilient house. What I want to add here is that for the charter houses, I think what should be mandatory is that you should at least have a safe room, which will be like your bathroom, fully wall concrete that have a concrete roof on top, so that in the event that if a hurricane or tropical storm comes and the house is destroyed and happen to be destroyed, you will still have a safe room to reside until you will start to rebuild again. And it can also be very helpful in terms of severe weather, such as in the case of the freak storm that we had in June 2021. But as I said, it all depends on where the house is going to be located. And you also have to remember too is that we complain of the heat too. And you have to design the house in such a way that it should be able to dissipate the heat as much as possible, because child houses are not going to absorb as much heat as a wall house. And that is what is happening right now.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Browne, in speaking for your membership, what are some of the key challenges that builders and engineers are facing when it comes to trying to get Barbadians to go with the code? Because I would imagine, you said that the costs to build to spec or build in line with the code are not that much different, but a lot of the times when people think about contracting professional services, I know that you reinforced that the services are available to all and sundry at reasonable rates. But sometimes when people think of professionals in various areas, and architects are no different, they believe that costs could be a little more exorbitant than there would be if they don't use people who are accredited or professionals in this regard. So what are some of the hindrances to your membership being able to guide people in the direction of building in line with the code?
I believe I can speak on behalf of architect engineers when I tell you that the only hindrance is the lack of the mandatory requirement. Almost every professional engineer and architect, given a project to do in Barbados, will, in fact, in many cases, exceed the local codes that we actually have. In some cases, in many cases, what we have is professionals who seek to design with long-term economy in mind, so that rather than, in other words, what they do, they look at the cost over a 20, 30, 40, 50-year period. And when you look at it from that perspective, they come up with the most economical, resilient designs and costs available. Now, the problem comes because there is a small minority of investors, for example, or homeowners, who don't understand the economics of the situation, who think that cost is what you spend up front. So if I offer to sell you a car, two similar cars, one for $5,000 and one for $50,000, you would be tempted to take the one for $5,000. If I were to give you a costing over a 5-year period, what you may find is that the $5,000 upfront car will cost you $200,000, whereas that $50,000 car is going to cost you $53,000 over that period. The economics are clear. The engineers and the professionals want to build a code because it is what professionals do. It makes sense. It makes economic, engineering, social sense. The only problem is, and Barbados is the exception, every other country has realized that this is not something to be left to chance. The question that we heard about building in different areas, the code anticipates and makes provision for all that. So if you enlist the help of a professional in designing your home, the professional is going to look at the location, the threats, things that you don't even think about or that you may not even be aware of will be taken into consideration to make sure that you have a home that you can trust your family with, that you can trust your investment for the next 30, 40 years, and you can live happily and safely. You may try to think, and one of the callers gave the example of people buying the 1.5 inch or some small size wood rather than 2 inch or 2.5. And the truth is, a lot of people, when they're doing their building, they look at only the upfront costs. And to the extent that they can save $100 or $50, they make that decision. These could be life-changing decisions in an emergency. And many of these decisions, the correct decision is not that much more expensive. So the challenge really is that initial financial incentive to save a penny here, a pound wise, penny wise and be a pound foolish, don't do it. But this is not a problem for the professionals. The professionals actually understand this very well. We are challenged by the situation where it is our policy makers seem to be missing something and seem to somehow be thinking in this penny-wise situation where let's buy this 1.5 inch piece of wood because that's going to save us. That's only 10 cents per square foot. The other one is 12 cents. That kind of thinking is the problem that we face.
All right, let's take another call. Welcome. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business.
Hey, good evening. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Go right ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, two quick ones. First question, every year the DEM puts out a list of Category 1 shelters. I want to find out if those Category 1 shelters are structurally assessed by an engineer. And number two, Will the building code speak to the amount of overhead services that we currently have? Will more of those services be put on the ground as a result of the building code? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So 2 questions. Let's go ahead and start with you, Mr. Brooks. The question for
Yes,
you.
as I stated earlier, every year the Ministry of Education do an assessment of those buildings that are likely to be used as shelters. And within the complement of persons who are doing the inspection will be engineering, fire, and other agencies to make sure that there is some level of structural integrity of the building to withstand the likely impact of the hurricane. So the answer to that is yes. Engineers are involved in the assessment, and copies of the shelters booklet is available online, either from the Ministry of Education or from the Department of Emergency Management.
And I believe the second question was directed to you, Lieutenant Colonel Browne.
What was the second question again?
The caller wanted to know what are some of the additional services that might be on the table if the code is implemented, I believe.
Oh, yes, and he was asking about the overhead lines and systems like that. The code is very comprehensive, and as I said, it's a living document. So that one of the problems with our code is because it has not been mandatory, there has been no pressure for the standing committees to be making ongoing changes. The intent is that the code, once it is being used, people will complain about it. People will complain about things that need to improve, about things that are presenting challenges. The standing committees will review it, and they will come up with the optimum solution to the challenges. Our expectation is that once the codes come in place, issues like this, for example, and these are issues, the whole question of the way we overload these overhead lines now, will come to the fore, will need to be addressed, and will be addressed by the code. The code is extremely comprehensive. If you ever get a chance to go on for example, the code is a very expensive document. I mean, somebody was asking me if they can just download it and have a read. I think it costs something like over $600 for just the first part of the code. This code was put together by top quality experts over the last 30 years or so in minute detail to deal with significant issues. Architects and engineers and building professionals are trained to understand how to apply these in the different sections. This is the point that was made about whether you build on the coast or in a hill or in a gully. All that is actually covered. And so when we talk about the minimum additional cost of building to code, all these benefits come along. What you're getting is the expert years of knowledge. These are people who go to Dominica after storm and see what failed. And they come back here and they go into the code and say, no, this didn't work. This worked better. We don't like how that happened. They go to Bahamas after the hurricane. They come back and say, look, we have to make a change to that. These are the benefits that come when we build a code. In answer to the question that Mr. Brooks about the shelters, in fact, BAPE we have played a role in that. But I have to tell you that in the absence of a situation where the buildings had to be built to code up front, and that we could tell you, you had asked, for example, earlier how we would implement these things, how we would make sure it works. There's a planning and development department.
All right, so tell us about the implementation. We're going to let you tell us about the implementation after this brief break. All right, the challenges, we're down to the last few minutes of the program. Time goes by so quickly. We really have only been able to scratch the surface where it comes to the discussion. Let's take in another quick call before we wrap. Good evening, welcome to the program. Oh, unfortunately, we lost that caller. All right, so I'm going to give you an opportunity, Mr. Browne, to very quickly wrap for us. I took heed of the fact that you said that the code itself seems to be something that is not necessarily that accessible to the average person. So, you know, from where I sit, I think it might better serve Barbadians if they can see the importance of the code, go through it themselves. So accessibility for me might be something that we should definitely look at in future and sharing more about it with others online. So in your closing statements on building as we look toward the future.
But okay, so in comparison, for example, there's a code that doctors use to decide how to administer medicine depending on challenges. I don't think there's the expectation that the average person understands the complexity of that code.
However, we know the basics about. However, we understand the basics.
You know the basics of this too.
We know the basics of how things should be done. For example, the gentleman who called in a moment ago talking about the type of wood that should be used and specifics like that, I don't expect that the average person will know. But when we're talking about homeowners, then of course there are basics I believe that people should, you know, be aware of, or the information should be accessible for them to be able to hold even professionals accountable who are doing work. At this point in time, we can't even hold professionals accountable a lot of the times because we really don't know what to expect.
So there's a planning and development department whose job it is to actually manage that on behalf of the public of Barbados. A very competent department with a competent board. And the law is actually designed to give them the role of protecting the interests of the public, just as you outlined. And this is all in place, is all documented in the new act that just needs to be proclaimed.
All right, we definitely need to have you back with just us having a discussion, not to discount the other gentleman being here, but we definitely are pulling in several directions. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for sharing with us this evening. Selwyn Brooks, a member of the St. James Central DEO and former president of that organization. Also, Brian Murray, Director of the Barbados Meteorological Services, and Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Browne, President of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. And thanks to those of you who got in on the program. Let this be the start to a discussion, and we definitely need to delve further into what we need to do and what we need to know and hold the powers that be accountable so that we can truly move forward and build with that resilience in mind so that we're able to take care of ourselves. Until next week, on behalf of the entire crew, have a great evening and a good week ahead. I'm Teshia Hinds.